I don't know what they're going to decide. I think it should be released. I think that there's precedent for this. We know of situations where there were severe scandals, and this is one of them where, we're basically having someone being nominated to be the top law enforcement official in the country to enforce the laws, who's implicated in breaking so many of them. And I don't need to go through the sordid list, but this is someone who should not have been nominated, let alone confirmed.
Well, and as we consider the information that senators will have access to as they decide whether or not to confirm Mr. Gaetz, Bloomberg is reporting today, citing sources familiar, that the Trump transition team still has not signed an agreement with the Justice Department and therefore the FBI that would allow the Bureau to vet nominees. You, of course, also sit on the Intelligence Committee, Congressman, and I just wonder your thoughts on what it would mean if we don't get full background checks for, frankly, any of these people who could be getting some of the most powerful seats in the American political universe.
I think that's all you need to know with regard to some of these nominees. The fact that they're not willing to have a background check of these folks tells you that there are some serious flaws with them, not to mention that they're just ill-qualified and ill-prepared to do these jobs. And so I'm hopeful that the Senate will have hearings and vote a lot of these down. But I'm even more hopeful that maybe a couple of these will be withdrawn by the incoming president, given how seriously flawed they are.
Well, Congressman, no matter what happens here, it sure looks like Republicans and Democrats are going to have to continue working together if anything of any seriousness is going to come out of this Congress. Before you joined us, we were talking about the possibility of a Republican majority of one seat. Realizing that's not the most likely scenario, it's still possible with now, I believe, 4 races to be called. We just had one called while we were talking, while you were answering that last question. Marcy Kaptur winning re-election in Ohio's 9th Congressional District. That is the longest serving woman in congressional history. And so the walls are closing in a little bit more here on this Republican majority. What role will the Democratic minority play in the new Congress, and will you help re-elect Mike Johnson as Speaker?
Well, I think that, let me answer the first part, which is I think the Democratic minority is going to be essential in getting the business of the chamber done. As you know, on spending bill after spending bill in terms of making sure the government functions, Mike Johnson and Kevin McCarthy, for that matter, relied on Democrats to supply the votes to get the bills passed. I'm not going to be supporting Mike Johnson. I'm going to be supporting Hakeem Jeffries to be Speaker, and I think we'll be unified in that particular vote.
Well, when we consider the idea that come the next Congress, whenever the new speaker is elected, there could be 3 vacancies that need to be filled by special elections, and that could provide a bit of leverage for Democrats. Congressman, how easy will it be for the minority to hold up the first 100 days agenda working with this kind of margin?
Well, there are any number of issues that require a majority vote. And as you know, some of my colleagues on the other side will not in any case, for instance, vote on spending bills, vote for them, I should say. I call them part of the Vote No, Hope Yes caucus, where they are hoping that there are enough Republicans and, for that matter, the majority of Democrats supporting that measure to make it go through passage so that they don't have to support it and they can rail against it and rhetorically oppose it. So I think Democrats will absolutely be necessary for a lot of routine business that the incoming president as well as Speaker Johnson need to get done in Congress.
We're hearing about red lines, Congressman, from President Xi. This is something that we talked to you about, of course, because of your perch on the China Select Committee. And President Xi met with Joe Biden at the APEC summit the end of last week and reiterated his 4 red lines for when Washington turns over to a new Congress and, of course, a new administration with Donald Trump in the White House in January. Should he be concerned about what is coming? What will the Trump second administration mean for our relationship with China beyond this idea of across-the-board tariffs? Will there be a relationship between these two at all?
Yeah, I think so. I think there will be some continuity with regard to the policies of the Biden administration going into the second Trump administration, just the same way there was from the first Trump administration into the Biden administration. So, for instance, I'm hopeful that they'll keep the export controls in place with regard to high-end semiconductor exports. I'm hopeful that they'll keep the outbound investment restrictions in place. And finally, among other things, we have to do everything we can to repair our military industrial base and also equip Taiwan and our friends and partners and allies with what they need to deter aggression by the Chinese Communist Party.
What about TikTok, Congressman? Because apparently the president-elect wouldn't like to see it banned. After all, what's its fate in the United States given the legislation that has already passed and become law?
You're exactly right. It is the law. It's in the courts. I fully expect that it will be upheld by the courts. And if the incoming president wants to repeal that legislation, he should come back to Congress. Now, you should know that 360 people voted in favor of this legislation in the House, not to mention a huge majority in the Senate. And so I think that there's a lot of sentiment in favor of making sure that we protect our national security.
You know, Donald Trump has indicated that Mark Zuckerberg might be a greater threat to the American people than anything posed by TikTok. He says you get rid of TikTok and you empower Mark Zuckerberg. How would you react to that?
I don't think, I personally think that with regard to anybody in the United States, if the president wants to do something about social media, for instance, which a lot of us believe need to be regulated better, then we need to pursue legislation here in the House and the Senate and get it signed into law by the president, and we can do that. But with regard to a foreign adversary controlling a social media app, they are beyond our laws. They are beyond our rules and regulations. And that's why this particular law, which requires divestment by ByteDance of TikTok, makes sense, and that's why it commanded so much support.
Congressman, we were all a bit puzzled yesterday when the announcement dropped from the president-elect nominating Howard Lutnick to be Commerce Secretary. Also included in that announcement, saying that he is now going to have direct oversight of the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative, which typically reports directly to the president. And I wonder, as we consider the relationship with China specifically, knowing the battle that is likely to come over tariffs, what you make of that move and this kind of operational structure?
I'm not sure. You know, all I can say is that the substance of the policies that they're talking about, across the board tariffs of 20% on all goods from everywhere in the world, would be severely disruptive, be super inflationary for my constituents. It would hurt my exporters in Illinois, including our farmers in Illinois. And then it would, you know, basically divide us from our friends, partners, and allies whom we need in countering aggression from China.